The cheapest serious Claude just got scary good. Sonnet 5 now does near Opus work, and it actually edges Opus on knowledge work for a fraction of the price. Here's the honest breakdown. On the 30th of June 2026, Anthropic shipped Claude Sonnet 5, and the headline is not, "It dethrones everything." The headline is value. This is the most agentic Sonnet model yet, and Anthropic's own framing is refreshingly modest. Sonnet 5, they say, narrows the gap. Its performance is close to that of Opus 4.8, but at lower prices. That is the whole story in one sentence, and we are going to hold them to their own numbers, because the previous version of this script leaned on third-party comparisons we could not verify. Today, every single number you hear comes straight from Anthropic's official launch page and benchmark table. Nothing is invented, nothing is borrowed from somewhere else, and where Anthropic stayed qualitative, so will we. That is the bar for this channel, and Sonnet 5 is a big enough story that it does not need any embellishment to land. So let's start with the one number that genuinely turns heads. On GDPval-AA v2, Anthropic's knowledge work benchmark, where higher is better, Sonnet 5 scores 1618, Opus 4.8, their flagship scores 1615, and Sonnet 4.6. The model this replaces Monarch scored 1395. Read that again. The cheaper model edges out the flagship on knowledge work by 3 points, by a hair, but it edges it while crushing its own predecessor by more than 200 points. That is the single benchmark where Sonnet 5 beats Opus 4.8, exactly one. I want to be scrupulously honest about that because the rest of the table tells a more grounded and frankly more interesting story than any one-line crown ever could. On agentic coding, SWE-bench Pro, Opus 4.8 still leads at 69.2%. Sonnet 5 lands at 63.2 with old Sonnet 4.6, back at 58.1. So Sonnet 5 pulls 5 points clear of its predecessor, but Opus is still the coding king on Terminal Bench 2.1. Agentic terminal work, Opus 4.8, sits at 82.7. Sonnet 5 right behind at 80.4, and Sonnet 4.6 way back at 67.0. That is a 13-point leap over the old Sonnet, enormous, but Opus still noses ahead. Computer use, O's World verified, Opus 4.8 at 83.4, Sonnet 5 at 81.2, Sonnet 4.6 at 78.5. Same pattern every time. Sonnet 5 sitting right on the heels of Opus, comfortably past the model it replaces. Then the hard reasoning test, humanity's last exam. With no tools, Sonnet 5 scores 43.2% versus the 34.6 of Sonnet 4.6, and Opus leads here at 49.8. But turn tools on and Sonnet 5 jumps to 57.4%. And here is the kicker that is essentially tied with Opus 4.8 at 57.9, neck and neck. So the honest pattern across the whole table is this. Opus 4.8 still wins coding, still wins terminal, still wins computer use. It leads or ties on the hardest reasoning, and the one outright win for Sonnet 5 is knowledge work. There is no destroys Opus here, and I am not going to pretend there is knowledge. What Sonnet 5 actually does is get within a few points of the flagship on almost everything and beat the model it replaces on every single row, often by a landslide. For a model sitting in this price tier, that is genuinely remarkable, and it is the part that should make you sit up. A few points behind the flagship, for the workloads most of us actually run, is functionally a tie you can feel in your invoice. Now, why does near Opus performance matter so much down here? Price. During the introductory window, which runs through the 31st of August, 2026, Sonnet 5 costs $2 per million input tokens and $10 per million output. After that, standard pricing steps up to $3 and $15. Compare that to Opus 4.8 at $5 input and 20 SAFA output per token. Sonnet 5 is roughly 60% cheaper than Opus during the intro window and about 40% cheaper at standard rates. For something this close to flagship quality, that gap is the entire pitch, and it is a big one. But here is where Anthropic is unusually upfront, and where you need to pay attention. Do the token math. Sonnet 5 ships with an updated tokenizer, and the same text now maps to roughly 1 to 1.35 times more tokens. Depending on the content, more tokens per task partially offsets that lower per pint and token price. Anthropic actually set the introductory pricing on purpose, so the transition from Sonnet 4.6 lands roughly cost neutral. So please do not just multiply the sticker rate and assume a clean 60% saving on your bill. Measure your actual workload first, because the token count moved underneath you, and your real mileage genuinely will vary by the kind of content you push through it. Here is what makes Sonnet 5 feel different in practice, beyond the spreadsheet. It is built to be agentic. It makes plans, It uses real tools like browsers and terminals, and it runs autonomously through multi-step tasks instead of needing you at every step. And early access partners kept noticing the same thing over and over. It checks its own output without being asked, and it finishes long, multi-step jobs that earlier sonnets would stall on halfway through. That self-correction is the quiet upgrade here. Fewer drop tasks, less babysitting, more it just handled it. Think of the difference between a junior who hands back work you have to recheck and one who catches their own mistakes before you ever see them. It also brings adaptive thinking with selectable effort levels all the way up to xhigh, extra high effort, so you can crank the reasoning up for the genuinely hard problems and keep it cheap and fast for the easy ones. That dial, on a model this affordable, is a quietly huge deal for anyone running agents at scale. Availability is broad from day one. Sonnet 5 is the default model for free and pro plans, and it is available on Max Team and Enterprise. It is in Claude code, it is on the Claude platform and API as Claude Sonnet -5, and it is in the cyber verification program on the native Claude platform, on AWS, and on Microsoft Foundry, with Google Vertex coming soon. Anthropic also raised rate limits to accommodate the higher token usage that comes from that new tokenizer, so you should not feel squeezed by the extra tokens. On safety, the trend is good, and I am going to keep this qualitative because Anthropic did not put a single headline percentage on the main page, so I will not invent one for you. Compared to Sonnet 4.6, Sonnet 5 shows an overall lower rate of undesirable, misaligned behavior, lower hallucination, lower sycophancy. It is better at refusing genuinely malicious requests and better at resisting prompt injection attempts that try to hijack it mid-task. But the honest caveat belongs right next to that. Sonnet 5 still shows a higher misaligned behavior rate than the more capable Opus 4.8. So it is safer than its predecessor, not safer than the flagship. And there is one big asterisk, cyber. Sonnet 5 is much weaker at cyber tasks than current Opus models. On a Firefox exploit test, it could not build a full working exploit, 0.0%. It launched with cyber safeguards enabled by default, and Anthropic explicitly recommends Opus 4.8 for cybersecurity work that needs reduced guardrails. So if that is your use case, this is deliberately not your model, and that is by design, not a defect. One last honesty note, because it matters for how we cover this. Anthropic published these benchmarks against its own family, Opus 4.8 and Sonnet 4.6, not against GPT or Gemini. So we are not going to fabricate competitor heads to make a flashier thumbnail. You will not hear beats Gemini or beats GPT from us today, because Anthropic did not claim it, and we only report what is actually on the page. That is the deal, and it is the whole reason we recut this script. So, should you switch? For most people and most agents, the answer is yes. Sonnet 5 gives you something remarkably close to flagship quality at a fraction of the cost, with better self-checking and broad availability across every plan. Keep Opus 4.8 in your back pocket for your heaviest coding and for any cyber work. But make no mistake, the cheap model just got dangerously close to the expensive one, and on knowledge work, it actually pulled ahead. That is a genuinely big deal, and it changes the math for almost everyone building with these models. Stay curious, this is AI Unpacked.